She poured coffee into the general's cup with steady hands, her movements precise and invisible like they'd been for the past 18 months. The morning briefing at Fort Wellington's command center buzzed with urgent whispers about compromised satellite networks and foreign interference, but Sarah Chen remained a ghost in plain sight, weaving between decorated officers with her silver coffee pot. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. General Marcus Thompson barely glanced up from his classified tablet as she refilled his mug, his attention consumed by red-flagged intelligence reports streaming across the secure network. But when Sarah turned to move toward the next table, something made him freeze. There, just above the collar of her standard-issue service uniform, a small section of intricate markings caught the fluorescent light. Not random ink, not decorative art, but something that made his breath catch in his throat. The general's eyes widened as recognition hit him like a physical blow. Those weren't just tattoos, they were coordinates. Coordinates to a place that officially didn't exist, marked in a code that only 12 people in the world had ever seen. And 11 of them were supposed to be dead. The morning fog rolled across Fort Wellington like a gray blanket, muffling the sounds of early reveille and the distant rumble of transport trucks heading toward the perimeter gates. Inside the Mountain View Cafe, the sprawling cafeteria that served the base's 3,000 personnel, steam rose from industrial coffee urns while the aroma of bacon and scrambled eggs fought against the lingering scent of disinfectant and fresh paint. It was Tuesday, November 14th, and for most of the men and women grabbing quick breakfasts before their shifts, it felt like any other routine morning in the Colorado mountains. Sarah Chen moved through the organized chaos with practiced efficiency, her gray uniform blending seamlessly with the other civilian contractors who kept the base running behind the scenes. At 28, she possessed a kind of unremarkable presence that made her perfect for her job, someone who could navigate between tables of colonels and captains without drawing attention or curiosity. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, her face clean of makeup, her movements economical and professional. She'd been serving coffee and clearing tables at Fort Wellington for a year and a half, long enough for most of the regular officers to stop noticing her entirely. The morning briefing crowd was different from the usual breakfast rush. These weren't sleepy soldiers grabbing coffee before PT or maintenance crews fueling up for another day of equipment repairs. The tables near the east windows had been claimed by members of the Joint Cyber Defense Initiative, men and women whose clearance levels were marked by the subtle differences in their identification badges and the way conversations died when outsiders walked too close. Their presence at Fort Wellington wasn't officially acknowledged, but everyone knew something significant was happening in the underground levels of the command complex. General Marcus Thompson sat at the center table, his silver hair cropped military short despite his 53 years, his uniform bearing the weight of 3 decades in Army intelligence. Around him, a circle of officers bent over tablets and printed reports, their voices kept deliberately low as they discussed what the morning intelligence briefs were calling a Level 4 communication compromise. Foreign actors had been probing American military satellite networks for weeks, testing response times and mapping security protocols with the patient persistence of professional adversaries. Sarah approached the general's table with her coffee pot, noting the tension that radiated from the group like heat from a furnace. She'd developed an ear for the rhythms of military conversation during her time at Wellington, learning to distinguish between routine briefings and genuine crisis management. This morning carried the sharp edge of the latter, with phrases like penetration depth and communication blackout scenarios floating above the quietly urgent discussions. The general extended his cup without looking up from a classified report marked with red border stripes, his attention absorbed by columns of technical data that detailed network intrusion attempts and successful breaches. Sarah filled his mug with practiced precision, the dark coffee streaming in a controlled arc that never threatened to splash or overflow. She'd learned early in her employment that military officers valued competence above conversation, efficiency over engagement. Her job was to be present when needed and invisible otherwise. Lieutenant David Park sat 2 chairs to the general's left, his laptop screen filled with network topology diagrams that resembled spider webs of interconnected nodes and data pathways. At 26, he was young enough to still feel the weight of his security clearance like a physical burden, old enough to understand that the code streaming across his monitor represented the digital nervous system of American military communications. He glanced up as Sarah moved around the table, offering him a brief nod of acknowledgement that she returned with professional neutrality. Captain Lisa Rodriguez occupied the chair directly across from Lieutenant Park, her attention divided between a secure tablet displaying satellite telemetry data and a printed folder thick with photographic intelligence. She'd flown in from Peterson Space Force Base the previous evening, bringing with her expertise in orbital communication systems and a reputation for identifying attack vectors that others missed. Her coffee cup remained untouched, forgotten in the intensity of cross-referencing digital signatures with known threat actor methodologies. The conversation continued in the careful language of classified briefings, with references to numbered operations and geographic locations identified only by coordinate pairs. Sarah caught fragments as she moved around the table, refilling cups and replacing empty cream dispensers. Something about a 12-hour window of vulnerability. References to backup communication protocols that hadn't been tested under real-world conditions. Mentions of Allied forces who might lose contact with command structures if the primary satellite network suffered catastrophic failure. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the civilian contractor responsible for quantum encryption research, tapped her stylus against her tablet screen with the rhythmic precision of someone working through complex mathematical problems in her head. Her presence at the table represented the intersection of theoretical cryptography and practical military application, the bridge between academic research and battlefield implementation. She'd been awake for 36 hours straight, sustained by coffee and the adrenaline of knowing that her algorithms might be the only thing standing between secure military communications and complete system compromise. As Sarah completed her circuit of the table and turned to move toward the next group of officers, she felt the familiar tug of her uniform collar against the base of her neck. The sensation was so routine that she barely registered it, a minor adjustment that kept her service shirt properly aligned and prevented any glimpse of the skin beneath.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Developed the habit unconsciously over months of careful attention to military regulations regarding civilian contractor appearance standards. But as she pivoted toward the serving station to refill her coffee pot, the morning light streaming through the east windows caught her at precisely the wrong angle. The fluorescent overhead fixtures, combined with the natural illumination from outside, created a brief moment of perfect visibility that revealed what 18 months of careful positioning had kept hidden. Just above the collar line of her gray uniform shirt, where the fabric curved away from her neck during the turning motion, a small section of intricate markings became visible. General Thompson's peripheral vision caught the flash of geometric patterns, the kind of precise angles and intersecting lines that triggered recognition in a mind trained to identify significant details in chaotic environments. His eyes lifted from the classified report, following Sarah's movement with sudden sharp attention. What he saw in that brief moment of exposure made his coffee cup freeze halfway to his lips, the dark liquid growing cold as his brain processed information that shouldn't exist. The markings weren't random, they weren't decorative. They formed a pattern that he'd seen exactly once before, 17 years ago, in a secure briefing room buried 3 levels beneath the Pentagon. A pattern that represented coordinates encoded in a format designed to be invisible to casual observation, but instantly recognizable to anyone who'd been briefed on Operation Silent Guardian. A classification so deeply buried that even thinking about it required specific authorization protocols. His hand set the coffee cup down with deliberate control, muscle memory taking over, while his conscious mind struggled to process the implications of what he'd just witnessed. Those coordinates led to a location in the mountains of Eastern Europe, a place where American forces had conducted operations that officially never happened. A place where 12 soldiers had volunteered for a mission that required them to carry encrypted location data in a form that couldn't be captured, couldn't be extracted, couldn't be compromised, even under the most extreme interrogation. The general's throat felt suddenly dry despite the coffee he'd been drinking. His eyes tracked Sarah's movement as she approached the serving station, noting details that had been invisible during 18 months of routine interaction. The way she moved with economy of motion that suggested training beyond civilian food service. The unconscious way she maintained situational awareness, noting the positions of exits and the locations of potential threats. The controlled breathing pattern of someone accustomed to managing stress in high-pressure environments. Lieutenant Park noticed the general's sudden stillness, and followed his gaze toward the serving station, where Sarah was refilling her coffee pot from the industrial urn. He saw nothing unusual in her actions, just another contractor performing routine duties with professional competence. But the general's expression had shifted from routine attention to something approaching shock, the kind of recognition that carried implications beyond simple identification. Operation Silent Guardian had been classified above Lieutenant Park's clearance level, filed in archives that required special authorization to access. He knew it only as a reference in other documents, a footnote in reports about unconventional warfare tactics and deep cover intelligence operations. But General Thompson had been there when the program was designed, when 12 volunteers had undergone a procedure that embedded crucial mission data directly into their skin, using techniques that pushed the boundaries of both technology and human endurance. The general's memories of that briefing room were sharp despite the passage of years. He could still see the faces of the volunteers, could still hear the careful legal language that explained how the operation would be structured to provide plausible deniability if things went wrong. The coordinates tattooed onto their bodies weren't decorative art, they were quantum-encrypted location data that could guide friendly forces to extraction points, supply caches and safe houses scattered across hostile territory. 11 of those 12 soldiers had died when their convoy was ambushed during a peacekeeping mission that went catastrophically wrong. Their bodies had been recovered, their tattoos removed or destroyed to prevent enemy forces from accessing the encoded information. The 12th soldier had been listed as missing, presumed dead, her body never found in the aftermath of the attack that turned a routine patrol into a massacre, documented only in classified after-action reports. But Colonel James Chen hadn't died in that ambush. According to the files that General Thompson had reviewed during the investigation, Chen had survived long enough to activate emergency protocols and ensure that sensitive intelligence didn't fall into enemy hands. His final transmission had been a burst of encrypted data lasting less than 3 seconds, coordinates that led rescue teams to the location where they found evidence of his last stand but no body to recover. The general's eyes remained fixed on Sarah as she moved back toward the briefing tables, carrying her refilled coffee pot with the same steady competence she'd displayed every morning since her employment began. But now he was seeing details that military training had taught him to recognize. The way she maintained perfect balance while navigating between closely spaced tables. The unconscious manner in which she positioned herself to maintain clear lines of sight to all entrances. The controlled breathing pattern that suggested familiarity with high-stress situations. Sarah Chen wasn't just Colonel James Chen's daughter, she was his living legacy, carrying encrypted data that had been tattooed onto her skin during a classified procedure that officially never happened. The coordinates hidden beneath her uniform collar weren't memorial ink or decorative art. They were quantum-encrypted intelligence that could unlock access to resources, locations and protocols that had been buried along with Operation Silent Guardian. The morning briefing continued around them, with officers discussing satellite vulnerabilities and communication backup procedures, unaware that the solution to their current crisis might be walking among them carrying a coffee pot. Dr. Vasquez continued working through her encryption algorithms, Lieutenant Park monitored network intrusion attempts, Captain Rodriguez analyzed satellite telemetry data. But General Thompson sat frozen in recognition, understanding that the young woman serving coffee had been hiding in plain sight, carrying secrets that could change everything they thought they knew about their current situation. The fog outside continued its slow retreat up the mountainsides, revealing the stark beauty of the Colorado landscape, and the impressive fortifications that made Fort Wellington one of the most secure military installations in the continental United States. Inside the Mountain View Cafe, routine morning operations continued with clockwork precision, but for General Marcus Thompson, nothing would ever be routine again. The ghost of Operation Silent Guardian had just poured coffee into his cup, and the implications of that recognition were about to transform a cybersecurity crisis into something far more complex and dangerous than anyone in that room could imagine. The Joint Cyber Defense Initiative had transformed Fort Wellington's lower levels into something resembling a digital battlefield command center. 3 floors beneath the Mountain View Cafe, behind blast doors thick enough to withstand direct artillery strikes, the most sophisticated cyber warfare equipment in the American military arsenal hummed with constant activity. Banks of quantum processors analyzed incoming data streams at rates that pushed the boundaries of current technology, while holographic displays projected three-dimensional maps of global communication networks that pulsed with real-time traffic patterns. General Thompson had spent the better part of the previous week in these underground chambers, watching his team of specialists track what intelligence analysts were calling the most sophisticated cyber reconnaissance operation ever attempted against American military infrastructure. The enemy wasn't trying to destroy their networks outright. Instead, they were mapping every connection, cataloging every vulnerability, learning the precise architecture of systems that protected everything from troop movements to nuclear launch protocols. The morning briefing in the cafe represented a brief surface interval in what had become an around-the-clock crisis management operation. Thompson insisted on these upstairs meetings not just for security reasons, but because he'd learned that prolonged exposure to the underground command center could warp perspective. Officers who spent too many consecutive hours surrounded by screens displaying network intrusion attempts and vulnerability assessments began to see threats everywhere, losing the ability to distinguish between genuine dangers and routine system maintenance. Major William Hendricks emerged from the stairwell that led to the secure elevator banks, his uniform bearing the subtle modifications that marked him as part of the Cyber Warfare Division. At 34, he possessed the kind of technical expertise that had made him indispensable to operations like this, combined with enough field experience to understand how digital vulnerabilities translated into real-world consequences. His tablet contained the overnight analysis reports that would shape the day's defensive strategies. The Major approached General Thompson's table with the measured urgency that characterized all movement during crisis operations. His face showed the strain of 72 hours spent tracking enemy penetration attempts through networks so complex that mapping them required artificial intelligence assistance. Sleep had become secondary to the need for constant vigilance against adversaries who operated across multiple time zones and never seemed to require rest. Thompson gestured for Hendricks to take the empty chair beside Lieutenant Park, noting the way the Major's eyes automatically scanned the cafe's other occupants before settling into position. This kind of operational security awareness had become second nature during extended crisis periods, when the line between paranoia and prudence blurred beyond recognition. Everyone involved in the cyber defense operation had developed habits of constant observation, noting details and assessing potential threats in environments that should have been completely secure. The Major opened his tablet and tilted the screen, so that only the officers at their table could see the data displayed there. Overnight reconnaissance had revealed new patterns in the enemy's probing activities, suggesting a shift from passive observation to active preparation for something more aggressive. Network intrusion attempts had increased by 30% in the past 6 hours, with particular attention focused on satellite communication relays that served as backup systems for primary military networks. Dr. Vasquez leaned closer to examine the data patterns, her expertise in quantum encryption, allowing her to identify subtle signatures that others might miss. The enemy's approach showed sophisticated understanding of American military communication architecture, knowledge that suggested either extensive previous reconnaissance or assistance from sources with intimate familiarity of Defense Department systems. Either possibility carried implications that extended far beyond simple cybersecurity concerns. Captain Rodriguez supplemented the Major's report with intelligence gathered from her monitoring of orbital communication assets. Satellite telemetry indicated unusual activity patterns that correlated with the network intrusion attempts, suggesting coordination between ground-based cyber operations and space-based reconnaissance assets. The enemy wasn't just attacking their networks, they were simultaneously gathering intelligence about physical infrastructure that supported those networks. Lieutenant Park's workstation displayed a three-dimensional model of network traffic flowing through military communication systems, with different colors representing various types of data transmission. Red indicators marked areas where enemy penetration attempts had been detected and blocked, while yellow zones showed regions of unusual activity that hadn't yet been classified as hostile. The pattern emerging from this visual representation suggested enemy forces were methodically testing defensive responses, learning how American systems reacted to different types of intrusion attempts, The conversation around the table maintained the careful balance between urgency and discretion that characterized classified discussions in semi-public environments. Technical details were discussed using coded references that would be meaningless to casual observers, while operational specifics were communicated through subtle gestures and carefully modulated voice levels. Even in the relative security of the military base cafe, operational security protocols demanded constant vigilance about information that might be overheard or observed. Sarah Chen moved through this environment like water flowing around stones, her presence so routine that the officers barely registered her movements. She refilled coffee cups, replaced empty cream dispensers, and cleared away finished breakfast plates with the efficiency that had made her invisible during 18 months of employment. Her civilian contractor's status placed her outside the military hierarchy, making her simultaneously essential for practical operations and irrelevant to strategic discussions. The general found his attention divided between the tactical briefing and his growing awareness of Sarah's movements around the cafe. Details that had been meaningless background noise for the past year and a half now carried potential significance that he struggled to process. The way she navigated between tables without ever turning her back completely to potential threats. The unconscious manner in which she positioned herself to maintain clear sight lines to all exits. The controlled breathing pattern that remained steady, even during busy periods when other staff members showed signs of stress. Major Hendricks continued his briefing, explaining how overnight analysis had revealed new information about the enemy's operational timeline. Intelligence suggested that the current reconnaissance phase was preparation for a larger operation scheduled to begin within the next 72 hours. The target appeared to be a complete communication blackout, designed to isolate American military units from their command structures during a critical 48-hour window that coincided with scheduled NATO exercises in Eastern Europe. The implications of such an attack extended far beyond simple inconvenience or temporary disruption. Modern military operations depended on constant communication between field units and command centers, with split-second coordination required for everything from air support requests to medical evacuations. A successful communication blackout could turn routine training exercises into chaotic disasters where friendly forces might engage each other due to lack of coordination and situational awareness. Dr. Vasquez presented her analysis of the quantum encryption protocols that protected the most sensitive military communications. Her assessment suggested that current defensive measures might be insufficient against the level of sophistication demonstrated by the enemy's reconnaissance activities. The adversary showed understanding of encryption methodologies that should have been beyond the reach of most foreign intelligence services, suggesting either significant technological advancement or access to classified information about American cryptographic systems. Captain Rodriguez added her assessment of orbital communication assets, explaining how satellite networks that served as backup systems for ground-based communications were showing signs of targeted reconnaissance. Enemy forces appear to be mapping the precise timing and orbital characteristics of communication satellites, information that could be used to predict when backup systems would be available, and when they would be beyond effective range of ground-based military units. Lieutenant Park's network analysis revealed that enemy intrusion attempts were becoming increasingly sophisticated, adapting to defensive countermeasures with speed that suggested artificial intelligence assistance. The adversaries weren't just probing for vulnerabilities, they were learning from each defensive response, developing new attack vectors that exploited previously unknown weaknesses in military network architecture. This adaptive approach indicated enemy capabilities that exceeded previous intelligence estimates by significant margins. The briefing continued with discussions of defensive options and countermeasure strategies, but General Thompson found him facing aware that conventional responses might be insufficient for the level of threat they were facing. The enemy's sophisticated understanding of American military communication systems suggested access to information that should have been completely secure, raising questions about potential security breaches or insider threats that hadn't been identified through normal counterintelligence procedures. Sarah approached their table to refill coffee cups, her movements carrying the same professional efficiency that had characterized her service for the past 18 months. But now General Thompson observed the details that suggested training beyond civilian food service requirements. The way she balanced a heavy coffee pot without apparent effort, demonstrating upper body strength that indicated regular physical conditioning. The unconscious manner in which she maintained situational awareness, noting the positions of other staff members and potential obstacles without obvious effort. The morning fog outside had lifted enough to reveal the impressive defensive installations that surrounded Fort Wellington, with guard towers and sensor arrays positioned to provide comprehensive coverage of the mountain approaches. But the real battle was taking place in digital dimensions that couldn't be observed through conventional surveillance, fought with weapons that existed only as patterns of electromagnetic energy flowing through fiber optic cables and wireless transmission networks. Major Hendricks concluded his briefing with recommendations for enhanced defensive postures and accelerated deployment of backup communication systems. His analysis suggested that conventional countermeasures might buy them additional time but were unlikely to prevent a determined enemy from achieving their objectives during the critical window of NATO exercises. The situation required unconventional solutions that went beyond standard military doctrine for cyber warfare defense. The general absorbed this assessment while maintaining his growing awareness of Sarah's presence in the cafe environment. Her civilian contractor status had made her effectively invisible during previous crisis operations, someone who performed essential support functions without requiring security briefings or operational awareness. But the recognition of those coordinate tattoos had transformed her from background personnel into a potential resource whose capabilities remained completely unknown. The conversation around the table shifted toward discussions of contingency planning and emergency protocols, procedures designed to maintain military effectiveness even during complete communication blackouts. These plans represented decades of strategic thinking about warfare in degraded environments, but they had never been tested against adversaries who demonstrated such sophisticated understanding of American military systems and procedures. Part 3. The unexpected recognition. The realization hit General Thompson with the gradual intensity of sunrise breaking over mountain peaks, beginning as a faint recognition that grew into blazing certainty. He'd spent 17 years trying to forget the faces of those 12 volunteers, the men and women who had undergone experimental procedures that pushed the boundaries of both technology and human endurance. But memory proved more persistent than time, and Sarah Chen's profile carried unmistakable echoes of Colonel James Chen's features, softened by youth and femininity, but retaining the distinctive bone structure that marked them as family. Sarah moved through the cafe with practiced efficiency, balancing multiple tasks with the kind of spatial awareness that suggested training beyond civilian requirements. She navigated between closely spaced tables carrying heavy coffee pots and stacks of dishes, never bumping into chair backs or disturbing officers engaged in sensitive conversations. Her movements displayed economy of motion that minimized wasted energy and unnecessary exposure, techniques that were taught in military survival schools rather than food service training programs. The general's mind raced through possibilities and implications, trying to reconcile the young woman serving coffee with the classified files he'd reviewed during the Operation Silent Guardian investigation. According to those documents, Colonel Chen had been survived by a daughter who was attending college under an assumed identity, protected by witness security protocols, that had relocated her far from any military installations. The official records indicated she had been pursuing a degree in computer science, living under federal protection due to the sensitive nature of her father's final mission. Major Hendricks continued his tactical briefing, unaware that his commanding officer's attention had shifted from cybersecurity threats to the civilian contractor who was refilling water glasses 3 tables away. The major's analysis of enemy capabilities and operational timelines remained important, but General Thompson found himself reassessing everything he thought he knew about their current situation. If Sarah Chen was indeed Colonel Chen's daughter, her presence at Fort Wellington during a major cybersecurity crisis couldn't be coincidental. Lieutenant Park noticed the general's distraction and followed his gaze toward Sarah, seeing nothing more than routine food service activities that had been part of their daily experience for over a year. The young officer had eaten breakfast in this cafe hundreds of times, accepting coffee refills and meal service from Sarah with the polite indifference that characterized most interactions between military personnel and civilian contractors. Her presence had been so consistently unremarkable that she'd achieved complete invisibility within the social ecosystem of the military base. But invisibility could be a powerful tactical advantage for someone with the right training and motivation. General Thompson began reassessing 18 months of routine interactions, wondering how many classified conversations Sarah might have overheard while serving coffee during crisis briefings. Her position as food service staff provided access to informal discussions between officers who might be more careless about operational security when they believed they were surrounded only by civilian support personnel who lacked appropriate security clearances. Dr. Vasquez paused in her technical explanation to accept a coffee refill from Sarah, offering the kind of polite acknowledgement that had characterized thousands of similar interactions throughout the base. The quantum cryptography expert had no reason to suspect that the woman pouring her coffee might possess knowledge that could revolutionize their defensive strategies. Sarah's civilian contractor status placed her outside the military's information-sharing protocols, making her invisible to anyone thinking in conventional terms about resource allocation and expertise deployment. Captain Rodriguez continued her analysis of satellite communication vulnerabilities, describing how enemy reconnaissance activities had mapped the orbital characteristics of backup communication systems with unprecedented accuracy. Her briefing revealed the sophisticated nature of the threat they were facing, adversaries who understood American military communication architecture with dangerous precision. But she had no way of knowing that potential solutions to these vulnerabilities might be encoded in tattoos hidden beneath a food service worker's uniform collar. The general's awareness of Sarah's movements became increasingly acute as the briefing continued. He noted how she maintained perfect situational awareness while performing routine tasks, automatically tracking the positions of other staff members and cafe patrons without obvious effort. Her eyes moved in patterns that suggested training in threat assessment, scanning for potential problems or unusual activities with the kind of systematic observation that was taught in advanced military schools rather than civilian employment orientation programs. Sarah's interactions with other staff members also revealed interesting dynamics that hadn't been apparent during casual observation. She coordinated complex food service operations with minimal verbal communication using subtle gestures and positioning to direct workflow efficiency that exceeded normal civilian capabilities. Her leadership within the food service team was exercised through competence and example rather than formal authority, techniques that were characteristic of military personnel who had learned to operate in environments where traditional command structures might be compromised or unavailable. The morning rush began to intensify as more officers arrived for breakfast before their duty shifts, but Sarah's performance remained consistently excellent despite increased workload pressure. She managed multiple tasks simultaneously without showing signs of stress or fatigue, maintaining the kind of calm efficiency that was developed through training in high-pressure environments. Her ability to function effectively during peak operational periods suggested experience with demanding situations that extended far beyond normal civilian employment requirements. Major Hendricks shifted his briefing toward discussions of defensive countermeasures and resource allocation, but General Thompson found his strategic thinking increasingly influenced by the possibility that Sarah might represent an unconventional asset whose capabilities had been hidden in plain sight. Military doctrine emphasized the importance of leveraging all available resources during crisis situations, but conventional assessment procedures would never identify a food service contractor as potentially irrelevant to cybersecurity operations. The recognition of Sarah's true identity, if his suspicions proved correct, would require careful handling to avoid compromise in operational security or endangering personnel who had been living under protective protocols. Witness security procedures existed for valid reasons, and revealing Sarah's connection to classified operations could expose her to threats that extended far beyond the current cybersecurity crisis. Any approach would need to balance operational requirements against personal safety considerations, that had been carefully established by federal protection agencies. Sarah approached their table to clear away finished breakfast dishes, moving with the same professional discretion that had characterized her service throughout her employment at Fort Wellington. But General Thompson now observed her interactions with heightened awareness, noting the controlled manner in which she avoided direct eye contact while remaining alert to conversational cues that might indicate when she should delay her activities to avoid interrupting sensitive discussions. These behavioral patterns suggested training in operating within military environments while maintaining appropriate security protocols. The tactical discussion around their table continued with assessments of enemy capabilities and potential response strategies, but the general's strategic thinking had been fundamentally altered by his recognition of Sarah's likely identity. Conventional military planning assumed that available resources were limited to officially designated personnel with appropriate security clearances and documented expertise. But Sarah's presence suggested the possibility of capabilities that existed outside normal military assessment procedures, resources that had been carefully hidden for security reasons, that might no longer apply to their current situation. Dr. Vasquez presented her latest analysis of quantum encryption vulnerabilities, explaining how enemy reconnaissance activities had revealed concerning knowledge of American cryptographic methodologies. Her technical assessment indicated that conventional defensive measures might be insufficient against adversaries who demonstrated such sophisticated understanding of military communication security protocols. The situation required innovative approaches that went beyond standard military doctrine for protecting sensitive information systems. Lieutenant Park supplemented this analysis with his assessment of network intrusion patterns, showing how enemy activities had evolved from simple reconnaissance to active preparation for coordinated attacks against multiple communication systems simultaneously. The adversaries weren't just gathering intelligence, they were positioning themselves to execute a comprehensive assault designed to achieve maximum disruption during the critical window of NATO exercises. This level of coordination suggested enemy capabilities that exceeded previous intelligence estimates. Captain Rodriguez added her evaluation of satellite communication vulnerabilities, describing how orbital assets that served as backup systems for ground-based networks were showing signs of targeted reconnaissance. Enemy forces had apparently mapped the precise timing and coverage patterns of communication satellites, information that could be used to predict when backup systems would be available and when ground-based military units would lose contact with command authorities. This intelligence gathering suggested preparation for attacks that would exploit windows of vulnerability with devastating precision. The briefing concluded with acknowledgement that conventional defensive measures might be insufficient for the level of threat they were facing, but specific recommendations remained limited by the resources and capabilities that were officially available through normal military channels. General Thompson absorbed these assessments while considering possibilities that extended beyond conventional military thinking, options that might become available if his recognition of Sarah's true identity proved accurate, and if she possessed capabilities that had been carefully hidden for almost 2 decades. Part 4: Credentials and Growing Suspicion. The morning briefing dissolved into smaller conversations as officers prepared to return to their respective duties, but General Thompson remained seated at the table, ostensibly reviewing reports on his tablet while actually observing Sarah's interactions with other personnel throughout the cafe. His trained eye noted details that had been invisible during 18 months of routine contact, behavioral patterns that suggested training and experience far beyond civilian food service requirements. Sarah moved between tables with systematic efficiency, clearing breakfast dishes and resetting places for the lunch shift with movements that demonstrated precise spatial awareness and timing. Her coordination with other food service staff involved minimal verbal communication, relying instead on subtle gestures and positioning that suggested experience operating in environments where noise discipline was critical for security reasons. These techniques were taught in advanced military training programs rather than civilian employment orientation sessions. Lieutenant Park gathered his materials and prepared to return to the underground command center, but General Thompson's request for him to remain caught the young officer's attention. The general's expression carried the intensity that suggested developments beyond the morning's tactical briefing, implications that might require additional security considerations or operational adjustments. Park settled back into his chair, noting that Major Hendricks and Dr. Vasquez were also remaining at the table rather than departing for their scheduled duties. The general waited until the cafe's morning rush had subsided and most other officers had departed before speaking in the carefully modulated tone that indicated classified discussion. Despite their semi-public environment, his words were chosen to convey information to his team while remaining meaningless to any potential observers who might overhear fragments of their conversation. This kind of operational security communication was second nature to personnel with appropriate clearance levels and extensive experience in sensitive operations. General Thompson began by referencing previous intelligence assessments about enemy capabilities and operational timelines, but his analysis introduced new variables that had been discussed during the formal briefing. He suggested that their defensive strategies might need to account for resources and capabilities that existed outside normal military assessment procedures, assets that had been carefully concealed for security reasons that might no longer apply to their current operational requirements. Major Hendricks frowned at this suggestion, requesting clarification about what additional resources the general might be referencing. Standard military doctrine emphasized the importance of accurate resource assessment and capability planning, but Hendricks was unaware of any assets that had been included in their operational planning documents. His confusion was understandable given that conventional military thinking didn't account for resources that had been deliberately hidden through witness protection protocols. Lieutenant Park added his own questions about operational security implications of utilizing unacknowledged resources during active crisis management. His training in cyber warfare operations had emphasized the importance of maintaining clear chains of command and documented authority structures, especially during complex operations that involved multiple agencies and classification levels. The introduction of unofficial capabilities could create security vulnerabilities that might be exploited by sophisticated adversaries. Dr. Vasquez approached the question from her perspective as a civilian contractor with extensive security clearances, noting that quantum encryption research often involved theoretical capabilities that had been officially acknowledged or deployed through normal military channels. Her work frequently dealt with classified technologies that existed in liminal states between experimental research and operational deployment, resources that might be available under appropriate circumstances despite not appearing in standard military capability assessments. General Thompson's response was carefully crafted to provide necessary information while maintaining appropriate security protocols, explaining that certain assets related to Operation Silent Guardian might be relevant to their current situation despite the program's official termination status. His reference to Silent Guardian was subtle enough to avoid attracting attention from casual observers while conveying significant information to personnel with appropriate clearance levels and historical knowledge. The mention of Operation Silent Guardian created immediate recognition among the officers at the table, though their knowledge of the program varied significantly based on their security classifications and operational experience. Major Hendricks had encountered references to Silent Guardian in historical documents about unconventional warfare tactics, while Lieutenant Park knew it only as a footnote in cyber warfare development timelines. Dr. Vasquez had seen technical specifications related to the program during her quantum encryption research, though she had been briefed on operational details or personnel assignments. Sarah approached their table to refill coffee cups, her timing coinciding with a natural pause in their conversation that demonstrated either exceptional situational awareness or remarkable coincidence. General Thompson observed her movements with heightened attention, noting the controlled manner in which she maintained appropriate distance from their discussion, while remaining alert to cues that might indicate when her services were needed, or when she should withdraw to avoid interrupting sensitive communications. The general's assessment of Sarah's behavior patterns had been fundamentally altered by his recognition of her likely identity, transforming routine interactions into potential entethering opportunities. Her position as food service staff provided perfect cover for observing military personnel and operations, allowing her to gather information about base activities, personnel assignments, and operational timelines without attracting suspicion or triggering security protocols designed to identify potential threats. Lieutenant Park noticed the general's focused attention on Sarah's activities and began his own covert observation, trying to identify whatever had captured his commanding officer's interest. The young officer's training in cyber warfare had included modules on human intelligence gathering and operational security, making him sensitive to behavioral patterns that might indicate surveillance or reconnaissance activities. But his analysis of Sarah's actions revealed nothing more suspicious than competent food service performance. Major Hendricks continued the operational discussion by requesting more specific information about Silent Guardian assets that might be relevant to their current cybersecurity crisis. His understanding of the program was limited to historical context and general operational parameters, but he recognized that unconventional resources might be necessary to counter adversaries who demonstrated such sophisticated understanding of American military communication systems and defensive procedures. Dr. Vasquez added her technical perspective on quantum encryption capabilities that had been developed during the Silent Guardian program, explaining how theoretical advances in data encoding and storage had pushed the boundaries of what was technologically possible during that operational time frame. Her research had built upon foundations established during that program, though she had been unaware of connections between her current work and historical military operations until the general's recent references. The conversation shifted toward discussions of how classified technologies developed during Silent Guardian might be adapted for current defensive requirements. But General Thompson remained aware that their discussion was taking place in a semi-public environment, where operational security protocols demanded careful attention to information that might be overheard or observed. His strategic thinking had to balance the need for information sharing among his team against security requirements that protected both personnel and operations. Sarah completed her service at their table and moved toward the kitchen area, her departure providing an opportunity for more direct discussion about operational possibilities and security implications. General Thompson waited until she was beyond hearing range before explaining his growing suspicion that resources related to Silent Guardian might be present at Fort Wellington, concealed through security protocols that had protected personnel and capabilities for almost 2 decades. His explanation of this possibility required careful balance between providing necessary information to his team and maintaining appropriate security classifications that protected both ongoing operations and personnel who might be living under federal protection. The general's assessment suggested that their current crisis might provide sufficient justification for reevaluating security protocols that had been established under different threat conditions and operational requirements. Lieutenant Park's response reflected his training in operational security and chain of command protocols, questioning whether utilization of unofficial resources during active crisis management might create legal and procedural complications that could compromise their defensive operations. His concerns were valid given the complex regulatory environment that governed military operations involving civilian personnel and classified technologies that hadn't been officially acknowledged. Major Hendricks approached the question from a tactical perspective, asking whether potential Silent Guardian assets possessed capabilities that would be relevant to cybersecurity operations and communication network defense. His military experience had taught him to evaluate resources based on their practical contribution to operational objectives rather than their official status within military bureaucracy. But he remained concerned about security implications of utilizing unacknowledged capabilities. Dr. Vasquez offered her technical assessment of quantum encryption technologies that had been developed during the Silent Guardian program, explaining how advances in data encoding and storage methodologies from that era might provide solutions to current vulnerabilities in military communication systems. Her research had revealed theoretical possibilities that exceeded conventional cryptographic capabilities, though practical implementation would require access to specialized knowledge and technical specifications that might not be readily available through normal channels. The tactical discussion continued with assessments of how unconventional resources might be integrated into their defensive strategies while maintaining appropriate security protocols and operational effectiveness. General Thompson's strategic thinking had been complicated by recognition of possibilities that extended beyond conventional military planning, but implementation would require careful consideration of security implications and procedural requirements that covered military operations involving classified personnel and technologies. Part 5, The Revelation and Initial Confrontation. The afternoon shift change provided General Thompson with the opportunity he'd been waiting for. A natural transition period when the cafe's morning staff departed and evening personnel took over their duties. Sarah gathered her personal belongings from the staff locker area, preparing to leave after her 8-hour shift, unaware that her commanding officer had spent the entire day reassessing 18 months of routine interactions in light of his growing certainty about her true identity. General Thompson positioned himself near the main exit, reviewing operational reports on his tablet while maintaining casual observation of staff departure patterns. His presence in this location appeared routine to anyone familiar with his habit of conducting informal reviews at various locations throughout the base. But his attention was focused entirely on Sarah's movements as she completed her end-of-shift procedures and prepared to leave the facility. Sarah emerged from the staff area carrying a small backpack and wearing a civilian jacket over her food service uniform. Her appearance that far in a small sweaty scar the controls awareness. The general now recognized as evidence of military training rather than simple situational consciousness. Her route toward the exit would take her past his position, providing an opportunity for the kind of casual interaction that wouldn't attract attention from other personnel or security monitoring systems. The general's approach was carefully calibrated to appear coincidental while creating conditions for conversation, timing his movement to intersect with Sarah's path in a manner that would seem natural to any observers. His greeting carried the kind of polite acknowledgement that characterized routine interactions between senior officers and civilian contractors. But his eyes conveyed recognition that transformed the exchange from routine pleasantry into something far more significant. Sarah's response to his greeting demonstrated the same professional courtesy she'd shown throughout her employment at Fort Wellington, but General Thompson detected subtle changes in her posture and breathing pattern that suggested heightened alertness. Her training in operational security would have taught her to recognize when routine interactions carried additional significance, and his focused attention was apparently triggering defensive awareness that had been carefully concealed beneath civilian contractor behavior. The general suggested they step outside for a brief conversation about food service operations, providing a plausible explanation for their interaction while creating privacy for discussion of more sensitive matters. His request was phrased as a routine administrative inquiry, the kind of feedback session that might occur between base personnel and civilian contractors. But Sarah's response indicated she understood that their conversation would address topics beyond food service quality and efficiency. They walked toward a quiet area near the base perimeter where ongoing construction provided both privacy and plausible explanation for their presence, away from the main pedestrian traffic patterns that might expose their conversation to casual observation. The general's choice of location demonstrated operational security awareness while creating conditions for discussion of classified matters that required protection from electronic surveillance systems that monitored more sensitive areas of the facility. General Thompson began the conversation by acknowledging Sarah's consistent professional performance during her employment at Fort Wellington, expressing appreciation for her contributions to base operations and her reliable service during various crisis periods. His comments were factually accurate and could be overheard without security concerns, but they also served to establish his awareness of her activities and capabilities during situations that had tested the performance of all base personnel. Sarah's responses maintained appropriate professional boundaries while demonstrating the kind of situational awareness that suggested training beyond civilian requirements. Her acknowledgement of his comments was polite and appropriate, but General Thompson detected subtle indicators that she was assessing the conversation for deeper implications while preparing for various possible developments that might emerge from their discussion. The general's transition to more sensitive topics was gradual and carefully managed, beginning with general references to military operations and base security before introducing more specific elements that would test Sarah's knowledge and reactions. His approach was designed to provide opportunities for her to reveal information voluntarily while avoiding direct confrontation that might trigger defensive responses or security protocols that could complicate their interaction. His first direct reference to Operation Silent Guardian was subtle enough to pass as casual conversation to any potential observers, but specific enough to convey clear recognition to anyone with appropriate knowledge of the program. Sarah's reaction to this reference was carefully controlled, but General Thompson detected physiological responses that indicated recognition despite her efforts to maintain neutral expression and professional demeanor. The mention of Colonel James Chen was more direct, a deliberate test of Sarah's responses to information that should have triggered significant emotional and security reactions if his assessment of her identity was accurate. Her reaction confirmed his suspicions while revealing the extent of her training in operational security, demonstrating ability to manage potentially compromising information while maintaining cover identity protection protocols. General Thompson's explanation of his recognition process was carefully structured to provide information about his knowledge while inviting reciprocal disclosure from Sarah. He described his involvement in Silent Guardian operations and his familiarity with program personnel, establishing his legitimate authority to discuss classified matters while indicating his understanding of security protocols that had protect program participants and their families. Sarah's response was measured and professional, acknowledging his statements without confirming or denying specific details about her identity or background. Her approach demonstrated sophisticated understanding of security protocols and information management, maintaining particulars while initiating conversation that addressed increasingly sensitive topics. This behavior pattern was consistent with advanced training in operating under deep cover while maintaining mission security. General's assessment of their situation emphasized the potential relevance of Silent Guardian capabilities to current cybersecurity threats, explaining how enemy activities suggested knowledge of American military systems that might require unconventional defensive responses. His analysis connected historical operations to present circumstances in ways that provided operational justification for re-evaluating security protocols that had concealed resources for almost 2 decades. Sarah's questions about current operational requirements demonstrated technical knowledge that exceeded normal civilian understanding of military communication systems and cybersecurity operations. Her inquiries revealed familiarity with network architecture, encryption methodologies, and operational procedures that suggested either extensive research or direct experience with military systems beyond her apparent civilian contractor status. The conversation continued with increasingly specific discussions of technical capabilities and operational possibilities, but both participants maintained appropriate security consciousness despite their growing mutual recognition. General Thompson's strategic thinking had to balance operational requirements against security protocols that protected personnel who had been living under federal protection, while Sarah's responses indicated similar awareness of competing priorities and potential consequences. Their discussion was interrupted by the approach of Major Hendricks, who had been searching for General Thompson to discuss urgent developments in the cybersecurity crisis. The Major's arrival provided natural conclusion to their initial conversation, while creating opportunity for Sarah to assess whether the General's recognition would lead to expanded involvement in military operations or potential compromise of security protocols that had protected her for almost 2 decades. General Thompson's introduction of Sarah to Major Hendricks was carefully structured to begin integration of her capabilities into their operational planning, while maintaining appropriate security boundaries. His presentation emphasized her potential technical contributions rather than her classified background, providing framework for expanded involvement without immediate disclosure of sensitive information that might compromise ongoing security protocols. Sarah's interaction with Major Hendricks demonstrated professional competence and technical knowledge that impressed the cyber warfare specialist, though he remained unaware of the full implications of her background and capabilities. Her questions about current operational challenges revealed sophisticated understanding of cybersecurity operations and military communication systems that suggested extensive training and experience beyond civilian contractor requirements. The initial phase of Sarah's integration into their operational team concluded with agreement to continue discussions the following morning, providing time for General Thompson to coordinate with appropriate authorities about security protocol modifications, while allowing Sarah to assess the implications of revealing capabilities that had been carefully concealed for almost 2 decades. The quantum processors 3 levels beneath Fort Wellington began registering anomalies at 0347 hours, subtle variations in network traffic patterns that would have been invisible to conventional monitoring systems. Lieutenant Park stared at his workstation display, watching data streams that pulsed with an urgency that made his coffee taste bitter and forgotten. The enemy's reconnaissance activities had shifted from passive observation to active probing, testing response times and defensive capabilities, with the methodical precision of surgeons mapping neural pathways. Dr. Vasquez arrived at the underground command center carrying a thermos of black coffee and wearing the expression of someone who hadn't slept in 36 hours. Her quantum encryption algorithms had been running continuous analysis on the enemy's communication patterns, searching for signatures that might reveal their operational timelines and strategic objectives. The results emerging from her computational model suggested adversaries who understood American military communication architecture with disturbing intimacy. The holographic displays that dominated the command center showed global communication networks as 3-dimensional webs of interconnected nodes, with different colors representing various types of military traffic. Red indicators marked locations where enemy intrusion attempts had been detected and blocked, while amber zones highlighted areas of suspicious activity that hadn't yet been classified as hostile. The pattern emerging from this visual representation resembled a slow-motion explosion, with hostile activity spreading outward from multiple points of origin. Major Hendricks coordinated defensive responses from his position at the Central Command Console, directing network security teams across multiple time zones as they worked to identify and counter increasingly sophisticated attack vectors. His tactical display showed enemy activities that demonstrated coordination between ground-based cyber operations and orbital reconnaissance assets, suggesting adversaries who possessed both technical capabilities and strategic intelligence that exceeded previous threat assessments. Captain Rodriguez monitored satellite communication relays from her workstation, watching orbital assets that served as backup systems for primary military networks. Her analysis revealed that enemy forces had apparently mapped the precise timing and coverage patterns of communication satellites, gathering intelligence that could be used to predict when backup systems would be available, and when ground-based units would lose contact with command authorities. This level of detailed reconnaissance suggested preparation for operations that would exploit windows of vulnerability with devastating precision. The overnight shift had documented 17 separate intrusion attempts against classified communication networks, each probe more sophisticated than the last as enemy systems adapted to defensive countermeasures, with speed that indicated artificial intelligence assistance. These weren't random attacks by opportunistic hackers, they represented coordinated reconnaissance by adversaries who possessed advanced capabilities and detailed knowledge of American military communication systems. Sergeant Foster emerged from the secure communications booth carrying encrypted status reports from NATO forces conducting exercises in Eastern Europe. His expression conveyed the gravity of intelligence that suggested enemy activities were timed to coincide with the training operations, creating conditions where communication disruptions could transform routine military exercises into chaotic disasters. Allied forces had reported unusual electronic interference patterns that correlated with the cyber reconnaissance activities detected at Fort Wellington. The technical analysis revealed that enemy probing activities followed patterns that suggested intimate familiarity with American military communication protocols, knowledge that should have been impossible for foreign intelligence services to acquire through normal reconnaissance methods. Dr. Vasquez's algorithms had identified signature characteristics in the attack vectors that matched theoretical vulnerabilities. She had discussed only in classified research papers that had never been published or distributed outside secure military facilities. Lieutenant Park's workstation displayed network traffic analysis that showed enemy systems learning from each defensive response, developing new attack methodologies that exploited previously unknown weaknesses in military communication architecture. The adversaries weren't just gathering intelligence, they were conducting systematic testing of defensive capabilities, while simultaneously preparing for coordinated attacks that would achieve maximum disruption during critical operational windows. The correlation between inner activities and scheduled NATO exercises suggested operational planning that extended months into the past, with adversaries who had apparently been monitoring Allied military communications long enough to understand training schedules, exercise parameters, and the specific communication requirements that supported complex multinational operations. This level of strategic intelligence gathering indicated enemy capabilities that exceeded most intelligence community assessments of foreign cyber warfare programs. Major Hendricks called for enhanced security protocols and accelerated deployment of backup communication systems, but his recommendations were constrained by the resources and capabilities that were officially acknowledged through normal military channels. Conventional countermeasures might provide temporary protection, but they were unlikely to prevent determined adversaries from achieving their objectives during the critical window, when NATO forces would be most vulnerable to communication disruptions. Dr. Vasquez presented her latest analysis of quantum encryption vulnerabilities, explaining how enemy reconnaissance had revealed concerning knowledge of cryptographic methodologies that protected the most sensitive military communications. Her assessment indicated that current defensive measures might be insufficient against adversaries who demonstrated such sophisticated understanding of American encryption systems, suggesting the need for unconventional approaches that went beyond standard military doctrine. The command center's atmosphere grew progressively more tense as additional intelligence reports confirmed the scope and sophistication of enemy activities. These weren't isolated cyber attacks or routine intelligence gathering operations, they represented preparation for coordinated assaults designed to achieve strategic objectives that could fundamentally alter the balance of power in ongoing international tensions. The timing of these activities relative to NATO exercises suggested enemy planning that aimed to exploit maximum vulnerability for political and military advantage. Captain Rodriguez's satellite monitoring revealed that orbital communication assets were experiencing subtle interference patterns that suggested enemy forces possessed anti-satellite capabilities that hadn't been previously identified through normal intelligence gathering procedures. The adversaries weren't just attacking ground-based networks, they were simultaneously targeting space-based communication systems that served as backup infrastructure for military operations across multiple geographic regions. Lieutenant Park's network analysis identified attack vectors that exploited vulnerabilities in communication protocols that had been considered secure for decades, suggesting enemy access to classified technical specifications that should have been completely protected by multiple layers of security classification. The sophistication of these attacks indicated adversaries who possessed either advanced indigenous capabilities or assistance from sources with intimate knowledge of American military communication systems. The tactical situation continued to deteriorate as enemy activities expanded from reconnaissance to active preparation for operations that would achieve comprehensive communication blackouts during the critical 48-hour window of NATO exercises. Intelligence reports from allied nations confirmed similar patterns of cyber reconnaissance targeting their military communication networks, indicating coordinated activities by adversaries who possessed global reach and sophisticated operational capabilities. Sergeant Foster's secure communications with NATO forces revealed that Allied militaries were experiencing similar patterns of cyber reconnaissance, confirming that enemy activities represented coordinated operations rather than isolated attacks against American military systems. The scope of these activities suggested adversaries who possessed resources and capabilities that exceeded previous intelligence assessments of foreign cyber warfare programs, indicating threats that require responses beyond conventional military doctrine. Dr. Vasquez's computational models predicted that enemy forces would achieve their operational objectives within the next 72 hours, unless defensive measures were enhanced beyond current capabilities. Her analysis suggested that conventional countermeasures would provide temporary protection but were unlikely to prevent systematic communication blackouts that could isolate military units from their command structures during critical operational periods. Major Hendricks coordinated with intelligence agencies and allied military forces to develop comprehensive threat assessments, but these efforts were constrained by the limitations of conventional intelligence gathering and analysis procedures. The enemy's sophisticated understanding of American military systems suggested access to classified information through channels that hadn't been identified by normal counterintelligence operations, indicating security breaches or insider threats that remained undetected. The command center's holographic displays showed enemy activity spreading across global communication networks like digital wildfire, with new attack vectors emerging faster than defensive systems could respond. The adversaries had apparently achieved the operational tempo that allowed them to maintain initiative while forcing American forces into reactive postures that would be inadequate for preventing systematic attacks during the upcoming NATO exercises. Lieutenant Park's analysis of enemy communication patterns revealed coordination between multiple attack vectors that suggested central command and control systems with capabilities that exceeded most intelligence assessments of foreign military technology. The adversaries weren't just conducting cyber warfare, they were orchestrating comprehensive operations that integrated electronic warfare, space-based assets, and ground-based infrastructure in ways that demonstrated advanced operational planning and execution capabilities. Captain Rodriguez's orbital monitoring confirmed that enemy forces possessed anti-satellite capabilities that could disrupt communication systems across multiple frequency ranges and orbital positions, creating conditions where backup systems would be unavailable when primary networks came under attack. This level of capability suggested adversaries who had been preparing for comprehensive warfare rather than limited cyber operations, indicating strategic objectives that extended far beyond simple intelligence gathering or system disruption. The accumulating intelligence painted a picture of enemy forces who possessed capabilities, knowledge, and operational planning that exceeded all previous threat assessments. These adversaries understood American military communication systems with dangerous precision, possessed advanced technological capabilities that matched or exceeded American defensive systems, and were preparing to execute operations that could achieve strategic objectives through comprehensive communication blackouts during critical military exercises that involved allied forces across multiple geographic regions. Part 7. Crisis Escalation. The first major system failure occurred at 11:27 hours when primary communication relays serving the Eastern European theater went dark for 37 seconds, a brief interruption that sent shockwaves through NATO command structures and confirmed everyone's worst fears about enemy capabilities. Lieutenant Park watched his monitoring displays flash red as automatic backup systems struggled to maintain connectivity while primary networks fought to re-establish stable connections with field units conducting exercises across hostile territory. The communication blackout triggered emergency protocols that had been designed for technical failures rather than coordinated cyber attacks, creating confusion among allied forces who suddenly found themselves operating without reliable contact with their command authorities. Radio traffic exploded with urgent requests for status updates and operational guidance as unit commanders tried to determine whether the communication loss represented system malfunctions or enemy action requiring immediate defensive responses. General Thompson arrived in the underground command center within minutes of the initial alert, his presence adding gravitas to a situation that was rapidly escalating beyond routine cybersecurity concerns. His assessment of the tactical displays revealed the scope of enemy activities that had been building toward this moment, with coordinated attacks against multiple communication systems occurring simultaneously across several time zones and geographic regions. Major Hendricks provided rapid briefings on defensive countermeasures that were being implemented to restore communication stability. But his reports indicated that conventional responses were proving inadequate against the sophisticated attack vectors that enemy forces were employing. The adversaries had apparently prepared for every standard defensive measure, adapting their tactics faster than American forces could adjust their countermeasures. Dr. Vasquez's quantum encryption systems registered cascade failures as enemy forces launched coordinated attacks against multiple network nodes simultaneously, overwhelming defensive capabilities through sheer volume and complexity of assault vectors. Her computational models indicated that current defensive measures would collapse entirely within the next 6 hours, unless unconventional countermeasures were implemented immediately. The holographic displays showed enemy activity spreading across global military communication networks like digital plague, with new attack vectors emerging from previously unidentified sources while existing threats adapted to defensive responses with artificial intelligence assistance. The pattern resembled military operations that had been planned and rehearsed over extended periods, suggesting enemy preparation that dated back months or possibly years. Captain Rodriguez's satellite monitoring revealed that orbital communication assets were experiencing coordinate interference patterns that suggested enemy forces possessed space-based capabilities that hadn't been previously identified through normal intelligence procedures. The adversaries weren't just attacking ground-based networks, they were simultaneously targeting communication satellites and disrupting orbital relay systems that served as backup infrastructure for military operations worldwide. NATO forces conducting exercises in Eastern Europe reported complete loss of communication with their command authorities, forcing unit commanders to operate under emergency protocols that assumed hostile action rather than technical failures. These procedures were designed for limited communication disruptions during conventional warfare rather than comprehensive cyber attacks that could isolate entire military formations from strategic command and control systems. Lieutenant Park's network analysis revealed that enemy systems were exploiting vulnerabilities in communication protocols that had been considered secure for decades, suggesting access to classified technical specifications through channels that represented either sophisticated intelligence operations or internal security breaches. The attack vectors demonstrated knowledge of American military communication architecture that should have been impossible for foreign adversaries to acquire through normal reconnaissance methods. The cascade of system failures accelerated as enemy forces pressed their advantage, launching secondary attacks against backup communication systems while primary networks struggled to maintain basic connectivity. Defensive systems that had been designed to counter individual threats found themselves overwhelmed by coordinated assaults that exploited multiple vulnerabilities simultaneously, while adapting to countermeasures faster than human operators could respond. Sergeant Foster's secure communications with Allied forces revealed that similar attacks were occurring against British, French, and German military networks, confirming that enemy operations represented coordinated international cyber warfare rather than isolated attacks against American systems. The scope of these activities suggested adversaries who possessed global reach and resources that exceeded previous intelligence assessments of foreign cyber warfare capabilities. General Thompson's strategic assessment of the unfolding crisis indicated that conventional military responses would be insufficient to counter adversaries who demonstrated such sophisticated understanding of Allied communication systems and defensive procedures. The enemy's operational tempo suggested preparation and planning that extended far beyond opportunistic cyber attacks, indicating strategic objectives that could fundamentally alter the balance of international military power. Dr. Vasquez's algorithms identified attack signatures that matched theoretical vulnerabilities she had discussed only in classified research papers, suggesting enemy access to information that should have been completely protected by security classifications and compartmentalized distribution protocols. The adversaries possessed knowledge of quantum encryption methodologies that represented years of advanced research conducted in highly secured military facilities. Major Hendricks coordinated emergency responses with cybersecurity teams across multiple time zones, but defensive efforts were hampered by the speed and sophistication of enemy attacks that seemed to anticipate every countermeasure before it could be implemented. The adversaries had apparently studied American defensive doctrine extensively, preparing attack vectors that exploited both technical vulnerabilities and procedural weaknesses in military cybersecurity operations. The tactical situation deteriorated further as enemy forces demonstrated the ability to maintain coordinated attacks across multiple systems, while simultaneously adapting to defensive responses in real time. These capabilities suggested artificial intelligence assistance combined with human strategic planning, creating adversaries who possessed both technological superiority and operational flexibility that exceeded American defensive capabilities. Communication blackouts began affecting civilian infrastructure as enemy attacks expanded beyond military networks to target systems that supported emergency services, transportation networks, and power distribution facilities. The adversaries weren't limiting their operations to military objectives, they were creating conditions that would paralyze entire regions, while Allied forces conducted exercises that require reliable communication with command authorities. Lieutenant Park's monitoring systems register attack vectors that originated from geographic locations across multiple continents, suggesting enemy capabilities that involved either extensive international coordination or access to compromised systems worldwide. The distributed nature of these attacks made defensive responses extremely difficult, as countermeasures applied in one region had no effect on attack vectors originating from completely different geographic areas. Captain Rodriguez's analysis of satellite communication disruptions revealed that enemy forces possessed the capability to interfere with orbital assets across multiple frequency ranges and communication protocols, creating conditions where backup systems would be unavailable precisely when primary networks came under coordinated attack. This level of capability suggested years of preparation and resource allocation dedicated to achieving comprehensive communication dominance. The command center's atmosphere grew increasingly desperate as defensive systems continued to fail under sustained enemy assault, with conventional countermeasures proving inadequate against adversaries who possessed superior technology, detailed intelligence about American systems, and operational planning that anticipated every standard military response. General Thompson realized that unconventional solutions would be required to prevent complete communication collapse during the critical period of NATO exercises. Dr. Vasquez's computational models predicted total system failure within 4 hours unless defensive capabilities were enhanced through methods that went beyond current military doctrine and resource allocation procedures. Her analysis suggested that enemy forces had achieved the operational advantage necessary to accomplish their strategic objectives unless American forces could implement countermeasures that utilized capabilities and resources that existed outside normal military planning assumptions. The crisis had escalated beyond routine cybersecurity concerns to represent an existential threat to Allied military operations, with enemy forces demonstrating capabilities that could achieve strategic objectives through comprehensive communication blackouts that would isolate military units from command authorities during critical operational periods. Conventional responses had proven inadequate, creating conditions that required immediate implementation of unconventional solutions that might involve resources and capabilities that had been carefully concealed for almost 2 decades. Part 8. The desperate recall. General Thompson's decision to retrieve Sarah Chen from her off-base apartment came at 14:45 hours, after 3 additional communication networks had failed, and Dr. Vasquez's predictive models indicated complete system collapse within 90 minutes. The General Staff vehicle raced through Colorado mountain roads with emergency lights flashing, carrying a message that would transform a food service contractor into the most critical asset in American cyber warfare operations. Sarah entered her apartment wearing civilian clothes and carrying a cup of tea, her expression shifting from mild curiosity to professional alertness as she recognized General Thompson's driver and the urgency conveyed by their unscheduled visit. Her training in operational security had taught her to recognize when routine interactions carried life or death implications, and the General's presence at her residence indicated developments that extended far beyond normal military administrative procedures. The drive back to Fort Wellington occurred in relative silence, with General Thompson providing only essential information about the crisis. while avoiding specific technical details that might compromise operational security during transport through unsecured areas. Sarah's questions demonstrated sophisticated understanding of cybersecurity operations and military communication systems, revealing knowledge that confirmed the general's assessment of her capabilities and background. Lieutenant Park met him at the secure entrance to the underground command center, his expression conveying the desperation that had infected the entire cyber warfare team as they watched defensive systems collapse under sustained enemy assault. His briefing during the elevator descent outlined the scope of communication failures and the inadequacy of conventional countermeasures against adversaries who possessed superior technology and detailed intelligence about American military systems. The command center environment had transformed from organized crisis management to barely controlled chaos, with staff members working frantically to maintain basic communication connectivity while enemy forces pressed their operational advantage. Holographic displays showed global military networks failing systematically as coordinated attacks overwhelmed defensive capabilities that had been designed for isolated threats rather than comprehensive cyber warfare. Sarah's entry into the command center drew immediate attention from personnel who recognized her as food service staff, creating momentary confusion among officers who couldn't understand why civilian contractors were being brought into highly classified operational areas during active crisis management. General Thompson's introduction of her as a technical consultant provided temporary explanation for, while avoiding immediate disclosure of classified information that to meet security protocols. Vasquez approached Sarah with the kind of desperate hope that characterized personnel who had exhausted conventional solutions and were prepared to consider any alternative that might prevent catastrophic system failure. Her quantum encryption research had identified theoretical possibilities that counter enemy attacks, but implementation required access to specialized knowledge and capabilities that weren't available through normal military channels. Major Hendricks provided Sarah with rapid assessment of current defensive capabilities and enemy attack vectors, his briefing revealing the sophistication of adversaries who possessed technology that matched or exceeded American cybersecurity systems. His analysis indicated that conventional countermeasures would fail completely within the next hour, creating conditions where NATO forces would lose all communication with command authorities during critical exercises in hostile territory. Sarah's questions about network architecture and encryption protocols demonstrated technical expertise that exceeded normal civilian understanding of military communication systems, confirming General Thompson's assessment while raising new questions about her background and training. Her inquiries revealed familiarity with quantum encryption methodologies and network security procedures that were classified above the clearance levels of most military personnel. The tactical displays showed enemy activities that had achieved the operational tempo necessary to maintain initiative, while forcing American forces into reactive postures that were proving inadequate for preventing systematic communication blackouts. Sarah's analysis of these patterns suggested recognition of attack vectors and strategic objectives that indicated either extensive research or direct experience with similar operations. Captain Rodriguez briefed Sarah on satellite communication vulnerabilities and orbital asset protection, explaining how enemy forces had demonstrated capabilities that could disrupt space-based infrastructure across multiple frequency ranges and communication protocols. Sarah's technical questions revealed understanding of satellite communication systems that suggested training beyond civilian contractor requirements, indicating knowledge that aligned with General Thompson's suspicions about her background. Lieutenant Park's network monitoring systems registered additional cascade failures as enemy attacks intensified, with defensive systems collapsing under coordinated assaults that exploited multiple vulnerabilities simultaneously. Sarah observed these developments with professional interest rather than civilian confusion, noting technical details and asking questions that demonstrated familiarity with cybersecurity operations and network defense procedures. The command center's atmosphere grew increasingly desperate as personnel realized that conventional solutions would be insufficient to prevent complete communication collapse during the NATO exercises, creating conditions where Allied forces could be isolated from command authorities while operating in potentially hostile territory. General Thompson's strategic assessment indicated that unconventional approaches would be required immediately to prevent catastrophic military consequences. Sarah's preliminary analysis of enemy attack vectors revealed patterns that suggested access to classified information about American military communication systems, knowledge that should have been completely protected by security classifications and compartmentalized distribution protocols. Her identification of these vulnerabilities demonstrated technical expertise that confirmed General Thompson's assessment, while raising questions about how civilian contractors could possess such sophisticated understanding. Dr. Vasquez's quantum encryption systems continued registering failures, as enemy forces maintained coordinated attacks that adapted to defensive countermeasures faster than human operators could respond. Sarah's questions about encryption methodologies and network security protocols suggested potential solutions that went beyond conventional military doctrine, indicating capabilities that might provide alternatives to failing defensive systems. The crisis had reached a point where conventional military responses were proving completely inadequate against adversaries who possessed superior technology, detailed intelligence, and operational planning that anticipated every standard countermeasure. General Thompson's decision to involve Sarah represented acknowledgement that unconventional solutions would be required to prevent strategic defeat during one of the most critical military exercises in recent history. Major Hendricks coordinated final attempts at conventional defensive measures while simultaneously preparing for potential implementation of unconventional countermeasures that might involve capabilities and resources that existed outside normal military planning procedures. His tactical assessment indicated that standard approaches would fail within minutes, creating conditions that required immediate action using any available assets regardless of their official status or security classifications. Sarah's integration into the operational team occurred with remarkable speed as personnel recognized her technical competence and strategic understanding despite initial confusion about her presence in highly classified operational areas. Her questions and observations demonstrated knowledge that exceeded most military specialists, suggesting capabilities that could provide solutions to problems that had proven intractable through conventional approaches. The command center's holographic displays showed enemy forces achieving their strategic objectives as American communication systems collapsed under sustained assault, with NATO exercises proceeding without reliable contact between field units and command authorities. General Thompson realized that Sarah Chen represented their final opportunity to implement countermeasures that might prevent complete military disaster during one of the most important Allied operations in decades. Sarah Chen stood before the quantum access terminal with steady hands, her civilian clothing contrasting sharply with the high-tech environment that hummed with desperate energy around her. The command center had fallen into an expectant silence as she approached the biometric scanner, her movements carrying the controlled precision that General Thompson now recognized as evidence of training that extended far beyond food service requirements. The red emergency lighting cast strange shadows across her face as she prepared to reveal capabilities that had been hidden for almost 2 decades. The biometric scanner activated with a soft blue glow as Sarah placed her palm against the glass surface, the quantum processors analyzing biological markers that went beyond simple fingerprint recognition. The system was searching for genetic signatures, nerve response patterns, and cellular characteristics that had been encoded into its memory banks during Operation Silent Guardian. When 12 volunteers had undergone experimental procedures that embedded classified access codes directly into their biological systems, Dr. Vasquez watched the authentication process with fascination and growing amazement, her understanding of quantum encryption allowing her to appreciate the sophisticated technology that was analyzing Sarah's biological signatures. The scanner wasn't just reading fingerprints or palm prints, it was conducting deep tissue analysis that identified quantum markers that had been implanted at the cellular level, creating authentication keys that couldn't be duplicated, stolen, or extracted through conventional methods. Lieutenant Park monitored his network security displays as the quantum system began responding to Sarah's biological authentication, watching as dormant protocols activated throughout the military communication infrastructure. Systems that had been inactive for almost 20 years were coming online, revealing hidden capabilities that had been carefully concealed within the standard network architecture. These weren't conventional backup systems, they represented parallel communication networks that operated using completely different encryption methodologies. The authentication process completed with a soft chime that seemed to echo through the tense atmosphere of the command center, followed by the appearance of interface elements that none of the assembled personnel had ever seen before. The holographic displays shifted to show network topologies that revealed hidden communication pathways, encrypted relay stations, and quantum processing nodes that had been embedded within standard military infrastructure, but remained invisible to normal operational procedures. Major Hendricks stared at the transported displays with growing understanding of how extensively their communication networks had been modified during the Silent Guardian program, with hidden capabilities that provided alternatives to every standard system that was currently under enemy attack. These parallel networks operated using quantum encryption methodologies that were decades ahead of current military technology, creating communication channels that would be virtually impossible for enemy forces to detect or compromise. Sarah's access to the hidden network revealed the scope of her father's legacy, systems that Colonel James Chen had helped design to provide ultimate backup capabilities during scenarios where conventional military communications had been completely compromised. The quantum networks represented the deepest level of military contingency planning, resources that were activated only when standard defensive measures had failed, and American forces faced existential threats to their operational capabilities. Captain Rodriguez monitored satellite communication systems as dormant orbital assets began responding to Sarah's authentication codes, revealing space-based capabilities that had been carefully concealed within standard communication satellite constellations. These hidden assets operated using completely different transmission protocols that made them invisible to enemy reconnaissance, while providing secure communication channels that couldn't be intercepted or jammed using conventional electronic warfare techniques. The quantum communication network that Sarah had activated represented technological capabilities that exceeded anything in current military inventory. Systems that utilized advanced encryption methodologies and transmission techniques that had been developed in extreme secrecy during the height of Cold War tensions. The network provided communication channels that operated through multiple dimensions of quantum entanglement, creating information pathways that existed outside normal space-time constraints. General Thompson observed the activation process with growing appreciation for the foresight that had created these hidden capabilities. Understanding how Colonel Chen and his team had anticipated scenarios where conventional military communications would prove inadequate against sophisticated adversaries. The Silent Guardian program had created backup systems that operated at quantum levels that made them virtually undetectable while providing communication capabilities that exceeded anything that enemy forces could counter using current technology. Dr. Vasquez's quantum encryption research had prepared her to understand the theoretical foundations of the systems that Sarah was activating, but the practical implementation exceeded even her most optimistic projections about what might be possible using advanced quantum communication technologies. The network utilized quantum entanglement principles that created instantaneous communication channels across unlimited distances, providing connectivity that couldn't be disrupted by conventional electronic warfare or cyber attack methodologies. Lieutenant Park's monitoring systems began registering network traffic that operated outside normal electromagnetic spectrums, communication channels that utilized quantum properties of matter and energy that made them invisible to standard detection equipment. The enemy forces that had been systematically attacking American military communications had no awareness of these hidden networks, creating opportunities for coordinated defensive responses that would catch the adversaries completely by surprise. The activation of Silent Guardian protocols revealed the true scope of Colonel Chen's contribution to American military capabilities, systems that provided ultimate insurance against scenarios where conventional defenses had failed, and enemy forces achieved temporary tactical advantages. Sarah's biological authentication had unlocked capabilities that represented decades of advanced research into quantum communication technologies, creating resources that could restore American strategic advantages even after apparent defeat. Major Hendricks coordinated with NATO forces through the newly activated quantum communication channels, providing Allied commanders with secure connectivity that bypassed all enemy interference while enabling coordinated responses to the cyber warfare attacks. The hidden networks allowed military units conducting exercises in Eastern Europe to re-establish contact with their command authorities, transforming potential disaster into opportunities for demonstrating advanced American technological capabilities. Sarah's integration into the operational team occurred seamlessly as her access to Silent Guardian protocols revealed additional capabilities that had been embedded throughout American military infrastructure during the program's development. She possessed authorization codes that activated hidden defensive systems, accessed classified technical specifications, and enabled countermeasures that had been designed specifically to counter the types of sophisticated cyber warfare that enemy forces were currently employing. The quantum communication networks provided American forces with technological advantages that enemy planning had never anticipated, creating opportunities for defensive responses that utilized capabilities that existed outside normal military doctrine and operational procedures. Sarah's activation of these systems demonstrated how foresight and advanced planning could provide decisive advantages during critical moments when conventional resources proved inadequate against sophisticated adversaries. Captain Rodriguez's satellite monitoring revealed that the hidden orbital assets were beginning to interfere with enemy communication systems, using quantum transmission techniques that disrupted adversary coordination while remaining undetectable to conventional electronic warfare equipment. The space-based components of Silent Guardian provided capabilities that could neutralize enemy advantages while protecting American communication infrastructure from further attack. Dr. Vasquez's analysis of the quantum encryption protocols revealed that the Silent Guardian networks operated using mathematical principles that would require enemy forces to possess technology that was decades ahead of current scientific understanding to counter effectively. The systems represented the ultimate evolution of military communication security, providing protection that exceeded anything that current adversaries could overcome using known technological capabilities. The command center atmosphere transforming from desperate crisis management to confident operational planning as personnel realized that Sarah's activation of Silent Guardian protocols had provided them with capabilities that could not only counter the current enemy attacks, but also establish decisive technological superiority for future operations. The hidden networks represented strategic resources that could maintain American military advantages regardless of enemy technological developments or intelligence gathering capabilities. Lieutenant Park's network analysis confirmed that enemy forces were beginning to lose their operational advantages as Silent Guardian countermeasures disrupted their communication coordination while protecting American systems from further attack. The quantum networks provided defensive capabilities that operated beyond enemy understanding or ability to counter, creating conditions where American forces could regain initiative and achieve strategic objectives despite initial tactical disadvantages. Part 10. The Legacy Revealed. The quantum interface responded to Sarah's touch with cascading displays that revealed the true scope of Operation Silent Guardian. Holographic projections that filled the command center with information that had been classified beyond most personnel's security clearances for almost 2 decades. The data streams showed network architectures that extended throughout global military infrastructure, hidden capabilities that had been embedded within standard systems during Colonel James Chen's tenure as the program's chief architect and strategic visionary. General Thompson watched the revelation unfold with growing understanding of how extensively American military communications had been modified during the Silent Guardian program, recognizing tactical innovations that had been implemented decades ahead of their time by personnel who anticipated threats that were only now becoming reality. The hidden networks represented technological capabilities that exceeded current military specifications by margins that demonstrated extraordinary foresight and strategic planning. Sarah's biological authentication continued unlocking additional layers of classified information, revealing technical specifications for quantum communication systems that utilized principles of physics that were barely understood by current scientific communities. The Silent Guardian program had achieved technological breakthroughs that remained classified because their disclosure would fundamentally alter global understanding of what was possible using advanced quantum mechanics and engineering applications. Dr. Vasquez studied the technical documentation with amazement that approached reverence, recognizing theoretical concepts that she had explored in her most advanced research projects, but never imagined could be practically implemented using technology that had been developed during previous decades. The quantum encryption methodologies revealed capabilities that exceeded her most optimistic projections about what might be achievable using current scientific knowledge and technological resources. The holographic displays showed Sarah Chen's personal involvement in every aspect of Silent Guardian development, from initial theoretical research through practical implementation of systems that pushed the boundaries of what was technologically possible during their era. His leadership had created capabilities that remained decades ahead of current military technology, providing strategic advantages that enemy forces couldn't anticipate to counter using conventional approaches. Lieutenant Park analyzed network topologies that revealed how Silent Guardian protocols had been embedded throughout American communication infrastructure without appearing in any official documentation or technical specifications. The hidden systems operated using parallel processing capabilities that remained invisible to normal operational procedures while providing backup functionality that exceeded primary network capabilities by significant margins. Major Hendricks coordinated defensive operations through quantum communication channels that provided connectivity and security that enemy forces couldn't detect or interfere with using their current technological capabilities. The Silent Guardian networks allowed American military units to maintain coordination and strategic planning despite enemy cyber warfare attacks that had successfully compromised conventional communication systems. Sarah's access to classified technical specifications revealed that her father had anticipated the exact types of sophisticated cyber warfare attacks that enemy forces were currently employing, designing countermeasures and defensive capabilities that specifically addressed threat scenarios that had been considered theoretical during the program's development period. Sarah Chen's strategic thinking had encompassed possibilities that exceeded contemporary threat assessments by decades. The quantum communication protocols demonstrated how Silent Guardian had achieved technological capabilities that utilized advanced physics principles to create communication channels that operated outside normal electromagnetic spectrums, making them invisible to conventional detection equipment while providing transmission speeds and security that exceeded anything available through standard military technology. Captain Rodriguez monitored orbital assets that revealed space-based components of Silent Guardian that had been concealed within standard communication satellite constellations for almost 20 years. Hidden capabilities that provided backup communication infrastructure with technological specifications that exceeded current military requirements. The orbital networks operated using quantum transmission principles that made them virtually undetectable while providing global coverage that couldn't be compromised using conventional anti-satellite. Dr. Vasquez's analysis of Silent Guardian encryption methodologies revealed mathematical principles that would require revolutionary advances in quantum computing to compromise, providing security that exceeded current technological capabilities by margins that ensured protection against conceivable future threats. The encryption systems represented the ultimate evolution of information security, creating protection that would remain effective regardless of enemy technological developments. The command center personnel began understanding how Sarah Chen's work had created capabilities that exceeded official military specifications because the Silent Guardian program had operated under classification levels that prevented normal assessment and integration procedures. The hidden systems represented strategic resources that had been carefully protected for decades, awaiting scenarios where conventional military capabilities proved inadequate against sophisticated adversaries. General Thompson's strategic assessment of Silent Guardian capabilities revealed how the program had created technological advantages that could ensure American military security regardless of enemy advances in cyber warfare, electronic interference or communication disruption techniques. The quantum networks provided capabilities that operated beyond enemy understanding or ability to counter, creating decisive strategic advantages during critical operational periods. Sarah's integration of Silent Guardian protocols with current defensive operations demonstrated how her father's legacy provided solutions to problems that had seemed intractable using conventional military approaches. The hidden capabilities offered alternatives to every system that enemy forces had successfully attacked, creating opportunities for coordinated responses that would catch adversaries completely unprepared for American technological advantages. Lieutenant Park's network monitoring confirmed that Silent Guardian countermeasures were beginning to disrupt enemy coordination while protecting American communication systems from further attack, demonstrating technological superiority that exceeded enemy capabilities by margins that made their current attacks ineffective. The quantum networks provided defensive capabilities that enemy forces couldn't comprehend or counter using their current technological resources. The revelation of Silent Guardian's true scope transformed understanding of American strategic capabilities, revealing how advanced planning and technological development had created resources that exceeded official military assessments because their existence had been carefully concealed for security reasons that protected both personnel and operational capabilities from potential compromise through enemy intelligence gathering activities. Major Hendricks coordinated with Allied forces through quantum communication channels that demonstrated American technological capabilities exceeded NATO expectations, providing coalition commanders with secure connectivity and strategic advantages that strengthened Allied positions during the ongoing crisis. The Silent Guardian networks revealed how American strategic planning had anticipated complex scenarios that required technological solutions beyond conventional military doctrine. Sarah's access to her father's legacy demonstrated how personal sacrifice and professional dedication had created capabilities that would protect American interests for decades beyond the individuals who developed them, ensuring that strategic advantages would remain available when they were needed most. Sarah Chen's contribution to American security extended far beyond his service record, creating technological foundations that would support military operations throughout future conflicts. Dr. Vasquez's assessment of Silent Guardian technologies revealed that the program had achieved scientific breakthroughs that remained classified because their disclosure would fundamentally alter global technological development, providing American forces with advantages that depended on enemy ignorance of what was scientifically possible using advanced quantum mechanics and engineering applications. The quantum communication networks represented the ultimate evolution of military technology, providing capabilities that ensure American strategic superiority regardless of enemy technological developments or intelligence gathering capabilities, creating resources that would remain effective against any conceivable future threats while maintaining protection through classification levels that prevented enemy understanding of their operational principles. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.